All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Today we are going to hear about exploring farm to school legislative trends, and we're asking the question, what can state policy do for you? So my name is Cassandra Bull. I'm a policy specialist with the National Farm to School Network. And Lalani, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Lilani Nelson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Deputy Director and Senior Researcher at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, which is based at Vermont Law and Graduate School. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Alani. She's been an excellent collaborator through this process and a previous staff member of National Farm to School Network. Today for our agenda, we're going to give you an introduction to Farm to School, talk about the policy handbook, go over state policy trends. We'll touch a little bit on federal policy and the intersections. And then I'm going to give everyone a sort of demo run through of the new database and dashboard. And then we'll wrap up with 10 to 15 questions, 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So please, if you have any questions, enter those in the chat. And please try to stay muted until the Q&A if we ask you to get off mute. So, of course, I have to go over what is farm to school. So, farm to school really differs by location and context, but we like to say at National Farm to School Network incorporates at least one of the three main elements of farm to school. They are education on food, agriculture, and nutrition, school gardens where kids can get their hands dirty, and local procurement where schools buy local food. And farm to school also incorporates ECE as a sort of umbrella term to include early childcare and education. So we like to say farm to school is a triple win. It's a win for kids when they eat nutritious food and learn about farming, get their hands dirty, get outside. It's a win for farmers when they sell to schools and open up that market channel. And it's a win for communities when they're connected, supporting each other. And it creates really an atmosphere where communities can thrive. There are five main benefits of farm to school. We have a really great benefits of farm to school fact sheet, which we won't talk about here, but we can link in follow up. And really, the main benefits are economic development, public health, education, environment, and equity and community engagement. So that leads us to about National Farm to School Network. We are a network of over 20,000 members. We have more than 400 partner organizations and a national staff. Our mission is to increase access to local food and nutrition education, to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. And we have a vision in which farm to school programs are an essential component of a strong and just local and regional food systems, ensuring the health of children, farms, the environment, the economy, and communities. So as a network, our core functions are that we are a hub for information, for networking, and for advocacy. And we like to connect people to resources like what we're going to talk about today, and also our partner developed resources to people and to policies that can help them achieve their goals. And this is my last sort of intro slide, but if you aren't already, please do consider becoming a partner of National Farm to School Network. It's no cost. It's for organizations, agencies, schools, and businesses. And the requirement is that you must support our call to action in which 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. But the benefits of a partnership with National Farm to School Network include access to our listserv, policy roundtables. We have policy office hours with our full team. We like to feature your resources and you on our map. And my favorite thing is that you get to shape the trajectory of our network and the movement in general. And if you're not representing an organization, agency, school, or business, and you're an individual, you can sign up for our newsletter and become a member, and you'll get all of our alerts, access to our database and resource hubs, etc. So Lilani, do you want to share about your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. So I work at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems, which is based at Vermont Law and Graduate School. And so we're different from NFSN. We are a research-based institution or center that is, again, housed at Vermont Law and Graduate School, and that's in South Royalton, Vermont. It's not affiliated with UVM. And we work with students and produce original scholarly research in the field of food and agriculture law and policy more broadly. And so we serve a very large range of people working in food systems, and we work with local, regional, national, and international partners, organizations such as NFSN, to address food systems challenges by conducting our own research and then broadly disseminating the free and accessible legal and policy tools and information, such as this Farm to School State Policy Handbook. So that just gives you a sense of the type of work we do. And we also have a food and agriculture clinic and research assistant program. So students work directly on projects alongside our partners and engage in this innovative work that spans the food system. And you can visit vermontlaw.edu/CAFS to learn more, and I'll put that in the chat after I finish talking. But I have one more slide about CAFS. So here is a list of our areas of work and projects that gives you a sense of the breadth of our work and how it spans the food system. So we have a farmers market legal toolkit, a farmland access legal toolkit, a healthy food policy project, an area of work focused on urban ag policy. We have a website called the National Gleaning Project, also some work on seafood and fisheries, a Labels Unwrapped website, and an area of work that is on farm food and the rural workforce protections, some work on seeds and biodiversity, and then lastly, institutional food procurement policy, which is how the Farm to School Policy Handbook fits in. And again, you can visit our website, which is kind of brand new, really exciting. We have a new resource library that you can check out. So I encourage you to visit our website to learn more. And I will just call out two recently published resources that might be of interest to folks on this call. One of them is called Optimizing Food Distributor Contracts, Considerations for State and Local Public Sector Entities. And another one that's from a few months ago is called State and Local Government Policy Options to Increase Procurement of Locally Grown Cultural Foods in Maui County, Hawaii, and beyond. So those are just a couple specific examples of resources that we've produced that kind of fall into different project areas. And you can find all of that on our website, and I'll put it in the chat after this. All right. So we're going to now dive into the bulk of this webinar, which is on the State Farm to School Policy Handbook. And you can move forward the slides. Okay, so there's many different pathways to make farm to school policy change. And the closest one to home for all of us is the local level. And that includes municipal, like city or county, and school district level policies. For example, school wellness policies can make a huge impact if they include goals related to farm to school. So you can look into those if you're interested in that. And of course, there's state level, which is what we're focusing on today. So you will learn about that right here, right now. And then lastly, there's federal level, which can have a really large impact in terms of the scale and all of the different states that are implicated by that, but also can be very slow. And at the federal level, the USDA has the Patrick Leahy Farm to School Grant Program and also a Farm to School Census and regional coordinators that support the growth of farm to school, among other programs. But as I'm sure you all are aware, there is a lot up in the air at the moment for the federal level and a lot of uncertainty as to whether the programs or whether or how the programs will continue to be funded and the future farm to school at the federal level. And Cassandra's going to talk just a little bit more about that at the end. But we're focusing on state and what's possible at the state level today. All right, next slide. All right, so we're super excited to share with you our new State Farm to School Policy Handbook, which catalogs and analyzes state legislation between 2002 and 2023 from across the US that support farm to school. And it builds on past work that was originally released in 2011, and it's been updated roughly every 2 years since then. And this version comes with a new policy database and dashboard, which we are so excited to share because we've heard a lot of demand for that and we're finally delivering it. So this project was made possible by many student researchers and other staff from both of our organizations and reviewers from across the country. And it was a major group effort. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that was involved. And I think I saw some of your names here. So it's great to see you. And again, thank you to everybody who contributed to this huge project. Also, this project was funded by the USDA National Agricultural Library. So thank you for the support from them. The handbook is notable because we expanded the scope to also include related school food policy topics, which is different from in the past when we were more focused specifically on farm to school in the traditional sense, procurement, school gardens, and education. So we also, one other new thing is that included the final versions of state appropriations bills and budget bills that funded farm to school activities. And in terms of the methods that we used, our research methods, we used a bill tracking software called Fiscal Note to do a very wide search for bills using search terms that were related to farm to school. And then and I'll also say we included all bills regardless of their bill status. So that includes bills that were pending, passed, failed to pass. We included all of those bills in our initial search. And once we identified the initial batch of bills, our project staff reviewed them to determine whether they fit our criteria for inclusion. And basically that means we asked ourselves the question, like, is this bill directly related enough to farm to school to warrant being included in this farm to school policy handbook? And if not, is it related to the other school food policy topics that we were including in this round? As I mentioned, we expanded our scope. So these additional school food policy topics included expanding school meal access, child nutrition professionals, and also kitchen equipment and infrastructure updates, understanding that all of those things are critical to make sure that farm to school can happen. You need to have the kitchen equipment and the infrastructure in order to do scratch cooking and incorporate local foods into your meals. So that's the expansion of the scope and the methods. And then after we kind of ran through to see if the bills fit our criteria, then we took a lot of time to code the bills, which is basically adding them into our database and identifying specific pieces of information about them, writing a summary. So all the summaries that you see in our database were written by students or by staff. And then we used all of that to analyze and identify trends, which we're presenting on today. So if you want to know more than what I just said about our research methodology, you can look at the handbook, which has a lot more information, or reach out, and me and Cassandra are always happy to explain more. So ask us questions. All right, next slide. So the goals of the project were to develop a resource that could be used by those working in farm to school. Hopefully many of you on this call are going to use the handbook and we want you to use it. And these are just the ways that we imagine people using it based on how they have used it in the past. So one, it helps you navigate the farm to school policy landscape in your own state or your region. It can also help compare farm to school policies and programs from across different geographic contexts. You also can learn about specific policy topics and then potentially be able to replicate them. So you can be inspired by ideas that you're seeing other states work on. And then you can use if you're a researcher, you can use our data set to conduct national research and also assess the impact of these policies, which hopefully will inform future farm to school initiatives more broadly. Next slide. So why does farm to school policy matter? Research shows that farm to school policy works, and studies have shown specifically that state farm to school laws are linked to higher participation rates and increased local food purchasing. And more recent research showed that state procurement policies have a positive association with farm to school participation. So legislation can provide the funding, it can establish grant programs and creates positions in the context of whatever state you're in and what works best for the state. So it's flexible depending on what the state needs. And so focusing on state policy right now to us makes a lot of sense. And working at the state level is often more personal because the community-led efforts and the people working in schools can have significant influence to the people working on state policy due to relationships and shared priorities with your local and state reps. So relationships are really important here and they matter, and it's easier to do that at the state level than at the federal level. The Farm to School Policy Handbook and the database intend to make it easier for you to navigate this whole process. All right, next slide. All right, so over the last couple decades, states have proposed and passed hundreds of farm to school bills. However, states vary in terms of the available funding, the political climate that they're in, capacity, and states have different goals related to farm to school. So this graphic that we developed, I think, during the last round of the Farm to School Handbook update it shows different types of policies that we've categorized into these three buckets. And it ranges from early stage, what we're calling seeding, to a more mature, sustaining stage of farm to school policies. And as you can see here, seeding, those are policies that kind of have the lightest lift. They require the lowest political support and no funding. And this includes things like proclamations, such as declaring October to be Farm to School Month in the state. And it also includes state task forces and state databases and farmer directories, things like that. And then what we're calling in the growing category are policies that require a moderate amount of political support and advocacy, since they're changing existing law and purchasing regulations or guidelines. And so this would include local preference laws, pilot farm to school programs, and unfunded farm to school grant programs. And lastly, this third category, which we're calling sustaining policies, these are the bills that authorize funding for farm to school. They usually require way more political support to pass, and they're critical to achieve farm to school long-term viability. So that would include a funded farm to school program or a local food purchasing incentive. So again, this just gives you a map of sense of like how different bills can be categorized based on the kind of intensity and the political support and will and like funding that you need to pass them. All right, Cassandra, your turn. I'm going to hand it off.
Yeah, thanks for setting that stage, Lilani, and giving background about this really big project that's been going on for many years. Now we're going to dive into the trends. So I will just plug, we have this whole presentation is based on a report. It's about 40 pages long, and there's so much detail and examples of all of the policies we've analyzed and sort of different categories we place them in. So please do, if you're interested in anything we say, dive into that section of the report. You will not regret it. But first, just want to share that since we've been tracking bills since 2002, there's been over 800 bills and resolutions proposed in 48 states, DC, and 2 US territories, and about half of those passed. So 45% passed. You can see this timeline. It does seem like there's a lot of momentum over the past 5 to 10 years in farm to school policy introduction. And then our focus, zooming in from 2021 to 2023, shows just how much that the bills have, or that traction has grown. So more than a third of the 800 that we've observed over all time happened just within this 3-year period. So this map shows the dark green is states that passed legislation, the light green is states that proposed farm to school legislation. And what that amounts to is 43 states and DC proposed almost 300 bills within this 3-year period, which is really incredible. And I do just want to mention, we didn't scientifically track the mentions of COVID-19, but the last edition happened sort of in the middle of the pandemic. And what we did is sort of qualitatively observe how COVID-19 impacted state policies being introduced. And a big part of what we saw is that a lot of bills referenced COVID-19 as a motivation for creating programs. So for example, there's a school meals for all bill that included a local food component in Rhode Island that was proposed, mentioned COVID-19. New Jersey's Office of the Food Security Advocate was mentioned to be because of that, and a Food System Resiliency Council in Maryland. Also, something that we've noticed is state advocates have shaped their policies, like the kinds of policies they're introducing around federal COVID-19 relief programs. So like the local food for schools program rolled out in, I think 2022. And there's also right now, a lot of states are in the middle of farm to school state formula grants that can fund coordinators or regional coordinators. And so a lot of state advocates and policymakers are shaping around what are the gaps that the federal COVID-19 relief programs weren't filling. And then, of course, we have some examples I'll touch on later that some COVID-19 relief efforts actually sparked permanent state policies. So for example, a local food purchasing incentive in Connecticut was introduced and successfully passed that was inspired by local food for schools. I also want to touch on sort of like bigger overview that a lot of the bills we observed were appropriations bills. So they funded farm to school. That's where a lot of the magic happens. Again, our new methodology, as Leilani mentioned, and our new software allowed us to dive deep into appropriations bills. A lot of them funded programs that were passed via standalone other legislation, but actually quite a few of them funded programs that weren't passed in any other legislation. So programs can exist wholly just within a state's budget process, which can be appealing for some states in more conservative regions or other contexts in which a standalone bill might not be as viable as just including a program in the budget. So some budget bills we've seen are Connecticut in 2021, they codified and funded a grant program. Alabama, this is an example of within the state budget only. They have been funding a local food purchasing incentive that started, I believe, in 2021, and now started at like $125,000, and now just this year has more than $500,000 in the state budget for that program. And then for over a decade, Oregon has been funding via the budget process their very large farm to school program, which includes a state coordinator and grants for things like local purchasing, education, new leaf farmers, and also nonprofits. And I'm going to pass it back to Leilani to talk about sort of the flip side of what I just shared.
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. So yeah, many states also passed what we're calling non-monetary bills, which you can imagine what that means. So these bills generally aim to support farm to school policy goals, but without direct funding. So that means that they're often easier to pass, and although they don't have funding, they're really important to build awareness of the positive impacts of farm to school, such as Kentucky HCR 47 that commends schools for the local purchasing that they're doing. These sorts of bills often help build partnerships and connect people and get momentum going, especially during tight budget years. So think about if that might be something that you want to start in your state. They also can lay a policy foundation in the state that supports future farm to school funding, such as establishing local purchasing goals, like Vermont Act 67 that established a 20% local food purchasing goal by 2023. These bills can also, they can give permission for something such as Indiana HB 1320 that allows purchasing agencies to buy up to $10,000 of food per year from youth agriculture education programs as micro purchases. And so, yeah, we just want to say it's important to think about approaching these bills strategically since they're not, they don't come with funding and they do pose a risk of sometimes under-delivering because they don't have that established funding with them. All right, next slide. So farm to early care and education, also called farm to ECE, involves the same three core elements of farm to school: local food sourcing, school gardens, and food and ag education. And they're in ECE settings. So that's preschool, childcare centers, family childcare homes, Head Start, those sorts of things. It could be preschool programs in K through 12 districts too. And we've seen a tremendous growth in farm to ECE bills over the past few years, which is super exciting. So from 2021 to 2023, 18 states proposed 39 bills and resolutions that support or relate to farm to ECE, which is 13% of all the farm to school bills, which is amazing. Farm to ECE legislation's gaining, you can just clearly see it gaining support and momentum with 25 ECE bills passing from this time period, which is 2021 to 2023, which is a higher passage rate than non-ECE bills. So if you look at these pie charts, 64% of farm to school ECE bills passed compared to the 40% of non-ECE bills. And a couple key strategies that we have identified include including ECE in statewide programs, like California Budget Act of 2022 actually included a specific track for ECE in the Farm to School Incubator Grant Program. And another example, another key strategy and example is including ECE specifically in a local food purchasing incentive, which Michigan has done. Next slide. All right, so this is what we call a weighted Venn diagram, and it shows the number of bills from 2021 to 2023 that relate to the three core elements of farm to school. And it shows the trends that we're seeing in farm to school state legislation by looking at these three categories and how they overlap. So procurement, education, and gardens. And as you can see, there's a lot of procurement bills, which is not that surprising. I'm sure for everybody working in farm to school, that's like a big part of this. And then the darker shaded areas, those show the overlap. So there's 82 bills that address more than one core element of farm to school. And in that middle darkest section, you can see that there are 39 bills that relate to all three. And interestingly, there are no bills that relate to both procurement and school gardens simultaneously, unless the bill mentions all three of these elements. And then if you click, Cassandra, I think, yep, there we go. Okay, so the right side of this slide shows our policy database, a record page for a single bill. And this just shows an example of how we tagged the bills that we included in our data set by these different core elements of farm to school. So in this case, you can see, I mean, it's really small text, but where that red box is, those are what we call the farm to school core elements. And you can see that this bill that I just kind of randomly selected includes all three. And so when you look at the weighted Venn diagram, the ones that only are the gardens 14, they would only have the gardens tag selected there. All right, next slide. So education is a critical component of farm to school, and it includes food, nutrition, ag education, curriculum, but also includes taste tests and farm field trips and cooking demonstrations, and also experiential garden opportunities. And between 2021 and 2023, 38 states introduced 146 bills and resolutions related to education. And half of all bills from this time period relate to education in some way. And 82 bills have some overlap between education and another core element of farm to school. So some of the policy strategies that we identified, they include funding for educational grant programs, promotional programs, or those that just raise awareness for education related to farm to school. Also workforce development, state administrative support, and state curriculum support. And I think we have a slide that gives some specific examples. Yeah, so here are some specific examples of farm to school education bills. So SB 991 from 2023 allows the Department of Career and Technology Education to establish eligible grade levels for ag education programs in Oklahoma. And also you can kind of see that framework, the seeding, growing, sustaining type of bills being applied here. So you can get a sense of kind of what is involved in getting these, what sorts of funding and efforts to get these bills passed. So the next one in the middle, it's a workforce development example. So this bill would have established a student loan redemption program for those who teach about agriculture in New Jersey. And then lastly, we have an example of funding for educational grant programs, and that's HF8 SF25, which appropriates funding to the Minnesota Department of Ag, which includes up to $1.6 million over 2 years for urban youth agriculture education and urban ag community development. And it also includes $500,000 over 2 years for the Minnesota Agriculture Education and Leadership Council to develop their own grant programs. Next slide. So school gardens are another key integral piece of farm to school and offers educational opportunities, and school gardens also can be a source of fresh fruits and vegetables for students and the whole school community. And as you can imagine, school gardens take different shapes and forms, from simple container raised bed gardens. Some schools have hydroponics, school orchards, greenhouses, and more. And there's a lot of options for state policies that support school gardens. In terms of trends from 2021 to 2023, we saw that 21 states introduced 65 bills related to school gardens. And of the 65 school garden bills and resolutions that were introduced, 30 of them passed. And it was really exciting to see that 6 states introduced school garden legislation for the first time since 2002. And that included Connecticut, Indiana, Maine, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Virginia. And half of the 30 school garden bills that passed were general budget bills that included funding specifically for school gardens. And you can also see here on the slide some of these key policy strategies that we found in our research related to school gardens. And that includes funding grant programs that support school gardens, funding garden construction, so you can actually build the garden, funding positions that support gardens. Without these positions, the gardens can sometimes just fall to the wayside. and also connecting schools with community gardens. And so we have a few examples to share. Yep. So again, it follows the seeding, growing, sustaining framework. HB 2518 from 2016 established a statewide food safety certification program for school gardens in Arizona to make it easier to bring food from the garden into the cafeteria. And we actually have a case study. We have a case study on this one that I'll link in the chat. But it's a really great example, so you should check it out. We also Another example is Hawaii's Act 258, which established a permanent school garden coordinator position and included funding for the position for a year. And then lastly, Act 824-0375 from 2022 provides funding for the nonprofit Fresh Farm to provide hands-on education, including gardening and cooking for elementary schools in DC. And so those are just a sample of examples, but if you go to the policy database and the dashboard, you'll find many, many, many more. All right, Cassandra, I think it's
Thanks.
back to you.
It is. Thanks, Lilani.
Yeah.
Yeah, emphasis on these are just some of the incredible examples. We tried to diversify the states we were highlighting and the types and things like that. But now we're going to move on to procurement, the last element of farm to school and the most popular. So 70% of bills that we identified over our most recent snapshot were about procurement. And it's actually around like 80% of all of the bills we've tracked include a procurement aspect. We added, and because it's such a big topic, we have quite a few different subcategories and subtags that you'll learn more about later. And the biggest one is sort of new, and it's called general procurement support. So really, we tagged a bill in general procurement support if it doesn't have a ton of teeth or it doesn't fall into any of these other categories that I'll go over next. But really, it mentions local food procurement in the bill text. We would tag it as this. And so that's the most populous and sort of includes a wide variety of different bills. But the sort of actual most popular bill that we observed is the local food purchasing incentives, which I'll talk about in like 2 more slides. But really, these are policies that either incentivize or offset the cost of local food purchases for schools and ECEs. And you can see that so many of these bills passed because a lot of them were passed through the budget process. So that dark green on our graphic is a lot taller than the others. The next category is procurement preferences or goals. So these have been around for quite some time, but really it's when a state gives permission or requires schools to prefer local products over non-local products. And then for this edition, we sort of tagged on the goal in here because we saw the rise of local food purchasing goals, like Lilani mentioned, Vermont. Quite a few states are introducing policies that say a certain percentage by a certain date is the state's goal. The next is food service training, which I'll sort of lump together with farmer training and food aggregation and processing, because a lot of those are funded through grant programs, as Lilani shared before. But that is quite a popular category. And then the second, or I guess the fifth, and it's also a new category for us, is values aligned purchasing, also called values based purchasing. And really, we tracked bills that include preferences or targets for producers based on their identities or their growing or business practices. So that's sort of what we call values based purchasing. And then other topics that we tagged but didn't quite make it on the top 5 include things like increasing the small purchase threshold and requiring state farmer directories, which can be really helpful for identifying who wants to sell to schools. And so some examples include in the seeding category, Delaware encourages the use of locally sourced food through SCR 90 and requires a report, which I do believe came out last year. In the growing category, we see Illinois. We were really excited about this. Passed HB 4813, which allowed for values-based purchasing preferences in schools, so up to a certain percent. And Nebraska, in the sustaining category, passed the Farm to School Program Act, which permanently funded a coordinator. And then in 2022, they expanded the Farm to School program to include ECE, which is really special. And so Here is a map of local food purchasing incentives to dive a little bit deeper. So you can see from 2002 to 2023, at least 17 states and DC have established an incentive program. Um, and we've seen just in the 2021 through 2023, Connecticut, Vermont, Utah, Washington, maybe a few others I'm forgetting, actually established programs during that time. And even since then, Iowa, Oklahoma, and New Hampshire all have either pilot or temporary programs that are happening right now. And I do want to touch on, as Alani mentioned way earlier in the beginning of this presentation, we expanded our scope a little bit. So all the trends we mentioned were just farm to school bills, but we also included the related school food policy categories. And so obviously the largest is expanding school meals access. We tracked almost 250 bills that work to expand access to school meals, as well as things to bolster the school nutrition profession. There were just around less than 50 bills that worked to do this, and I'll share an example next. And then things like kitchen infrastructure and equipment upgrades, we saw around 50 bills that helped support the actual tools needed to process and serve local food. So just two examples for child nutrition professionals in Minnesota, they passed HF 2497/SF 2684, which provides summer unemployment benefits for hourly school staff, which includes frontline food service workers, just to make that position a little bit more tenable to have, especially if those folks aren't getting an income during the summer months. And then as an example for kitchen equipment and infrastructure, there's many, many other examples, but one is Washington has a Healthy Kids and Healthy Schools grant program, which is specifically for funding equipment and infrastructure for scratch cooking meals. And then I'll share a little bit more, but this is like an overview of all of the bills that went to expand school meals access. You can see it was very popular, 241 bills introduced from 44 states and territories to expand school meals access during the last 3-year period. And actually, like around 80% of those bills passed. So we've been really excited to see this trend in school food go to expanding access. And because that was such a big category, almost 250 bills, we gave it subtags. So the biggest one, obviously, we care about school meals for all or universal meals bills. So we tracked over 80 bills. And to date, so a little bit outside of our window, 9 states have passed universal school meals: California, Vermont, Maine, Colorado, New Mexico, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Michigan, and just this year, New York. But we also were really interested in sort of the different steps that states are taking to expand school meals access. So things like a partial expansion of no-cost meals. Maybe states are subsidizing participation in the community eligibility provision was quite popular. We also looked at states that eliminated the reduced price category, whether that's breakfast, lunch, or both. We've sort of tracked and tagged and summarized all of those for you to look at. We also saw anti-lunch shaming bills, so bills that say you can't punish a student if they can't afford lunch or to pay their meal debt were quite popular. And then we also looked at, there's a growing momentum to increase access to cultural and dietary needs meals. So things like kosher, halal, or plant-based meals, we all tracked. They didn't get a lot of passage, but we were really excited to see that they were being proposed. And then we have a pretty big other category because these bills are really nuanced and there's a lot of variation in between them. And then I will shout out, 2 years ago, National Farm to School Network released a 4-state case study about the ways in which states advocated for or actually included farm to school elements in their policies in their efforts to expand access to school meals. So California did a really great job, as well as Colorado, and then we also highlighted Maine and Vermont in that series. All right, so those were the trends. And before I give sort of a demo and send everyone into the Q&A section, I just want to take a minute to talk about the shifting federal policy landscape. So on the positive side, there's been a lot of momentum in farm to school, and we believe that there will be in the future. So just last year, a specific example is that schools can now require local in bid specifications, which I'm personally excited to see how states will incorporate that into state policy, but haven't seen it too much yet. But we are navigating some significant cuts and uncertainty. So earlier this year, the $660 million termination of the local food for schools and childcare cuts are at the forefront of a lot of our minds, as well as the cut to the fiscal year 25 Patrick Leahy Farm to School grant, which was slotted for about $10 million. And we've also seen disruptions in staffing, like the USDA regional coordinators. So those are actual sort of cuts and disruptions. And then we know that on the horizon, there are proposed cuts to SNAP Ed and a lot of the ECE work at CDC, as well as changes in SNAP eligibility, which can impact school meal access and other things like that. And even further out on the horizon, we're looking at the sunset of the state farm to school formula grant that I mentioned. A lot of states are sort of right in the middle of implementation of that. But really, all that to say that for emerging opportunities in state farm to school policy, now is the moment for state leadership. We firmly believe that. So take sort of our recommendation is for advocates and policymakers to seize on the shifting landscape and create something really solid and really unique to your state or other sort of cultural context in your advocacy. We also, again, coming from the COVID-19 pandemic, saw a focus on building a resilient food supply chain. So focus on the producers and who gets the food to the table. We're also seeing growing momentum in thinking regionally, both in state regions, but also there's been recent momentum in things like regional within a state farm to school coordinators, like in Oregon and California and New York. So there's momentum on that. Again, coordinating with Healthy School Meals for All efforts, we think that meal quality and meal access are two sides of the same coin and would love to continue seeing more momentum on that. And then lastly, something we all know, but now is an opportunity to celebrate farm to school as a nonpartisan issue, because who doesn't want to support local farmers and give kids nourishing, healthy school meals in school? Next, I just want to run through really quickly our state policy database. So this is already on our website and we've shared some screenshots, but essentially this is what the database looks like. There's a dashboard. If you go to it, you can see a map, the number of bills introduced, the states and territories that introduce them, as well as the different sort of main core elements or other topics that we tagged, the passage rate. And then you can also, there's a timeline. So over here, if you hover over it, you can see by year what states introduced policies and how many passed, things like that. You can also hover over different states. And so you'll see Vermont, for example, introduced 32 bills and 72% of those passed. You can also click on the state of Vermont, and then this whole dashboard will change for you, and it will show you just specifically Vermont's stats based on the dashboard. And if you hold down Command, you can click on multiple states. So here I clicked on the Northeast, and here it sort of changed the dashboard based on multiple states. And then if you scroll down on the same web page, you'll see a list of all of the bills that were introduced by state by year. And there's general filters like, right, it's set to see all farm to school and other food policy topic bills. But you can also uncheck that if you're interested. You can filter by year, bill or resolution, bill status. You can even enter like a search term and filter by ECE. We tried our best to get that information available. Also, there's basic topic filters. So Lalani and I just went through the 3 core elements. You can filter by those. So if you want to see school gardens, for example, you click all and then click yes, and it will do the filter and change everything for you. And then for the wonks in the room, and I know there are many, we have all of the advanced filters. So we tracked things like state goals, program structures, a lot of what we talked about today, like a grant program, positions, do you want to look at a task force? Also, all of the local food procurement subcategories I mentioned are all there. You can sort through them. You can sort through different kinds of funding. The other revenue stream I think is the most interesting because it shows sort of interesting ways that states have found to fund these programs. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of the subcategories of the expanding school meal access category. You can click on all of those there and filter it out. So again, this is an example of what it looks like when I filter for just local food purchasing incentives, all the states that passed, and sort of the timeline. And then also, if I'm on the database, I can hover over the bill titles, and it will give me, it'll show up the summary that either the students or the staff on our research team created for each bill. And then if you click on the bill title itself, it will take you to, Lilani showed this earlier, but like a Notion bill page. So a separate URL just for this bill, which shows our summary as well as different tags we've given it and links to the actual legislation and the bill status page if you're interested in that. It's all there for you. And then if you're really, really interested in filters, the sort of database with the map isn't the best at filtering. It's a little slow, be patient. We have an alternate database on the software called Notion for you to use and do a lot of that filtering technique. And then if you can't wait and you're really interested in seeing bills in 2024 and 2025, we have a different page which doesn't have the summaries or tags or anything like that, but it does have the bills that we've been tracking that will ultimately be turned into the bills on the database and have those summaries and tags. And we're working on that right now. So that is our presentation. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to everyone that supported this process. And yeah, we'd love to hear your questions. Also, here's our contact information. Please feel free to email us.
I'm going to say one thing that responds to one of the questions that we got, and
Sure.
somebody messaged me privately too. So I'm sorry I didn't mention this before, but we have a feedback form that we created so that all of you who are looking at this, if you see anything that's missing, like a bill in your state that you don't see in there, or something that looks off, or something you wonder if we can add, please fill out this form. We would love to hear from you. It's a work in progress. We're going to keep updating it. But right now it has bills through 2023. So if you're wondering what's going on after that, we haven't added that yet. But I put the link to the form in the chat, so feel free to use that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Lilani. This is such a big project and there's so many bills being introduced. We do rely heavily on our partners, and all of that sort of context and nuance can't be gathered in Fiscal Note, our policy software. So thank you all for helping us.
So I think our first question from Allie was, are appropriations bills the only way to fund farm to school programs, or can that happen as a standalone bill as well? Cassandra, do you want to talk about that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it? I'm not sure if I understand.
Yep, it's, are appropriations bills the only way farm to school programs can be funded, or can that happen in a standalone bill as well?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that a standalone bill can direct funding and also direct it from maybe things like general appropriations. So each, state agency will have their own budget, and so it can sort of direct, X amount from the general budget must be appropriated for this. So it can happen in a standalone bill, and it can also happen sort of outside of that process. And it's different for every state. So it's hard to be a little bit generalizable here, but yeah, standalone bills can direct funding.
And also, like Cassandra said, bills can establish new revenue, like different revenue streams that can be used in kind of creative ways. And I'm putting an example in there that I always kind of chuckle at, which is a bill that amends, and it didn't pass, but it amends the Alabama Constitution to establish an official state lottery, with part of the proceeds going to fund public or private agricultural education programs. So there's interesting things you can find in our database.
Yeah, thanks, Alani. Are there any other questions? Oh, I think I'll also comment to Rachel. I should have said, and it's in the handbook, we started looking at the expanding school meals access bills just from 21 to 23. So if Arizona has reduced price policy that was before 2021, we decided we're not going to go back. We can't go back. So it has just the bills released within that time period and will continue to. Yeah, thanks for your thanks for your laugh, Rachel. We're not saying that the states do not have policies before that time. It's just not in the database.
Hey y'all, this is Ryan with also with National Farm School Network. I saw that Kate had asked a question about Act 258 in Hawaii, which passed in 2021, if that's still funded, if has you know has that permanent farm school coordinator position continued. And I saw that Kaden had replied that it's not a permanent position, it's on a year by year basis for funding, which luckily has been funded since then. But I thought it was interesting that Kate also kind of asked kind of like a follow-up question to that. Perhaps a broader question is more useful. Are you seeing pushback or decline in this policy trend since 2023?
Yeah, so I think more broadly, I don't know if it's specific to coordinator positions or in general, but I would say in general, we are not seeing decline in farm to school policies since 2023. If anything, we're seeing growth and we're seeing a lot of support just this year. So speaking outside of that year scope, we're seeing a lot of support from state lawmakers around continuing to fund programs that were already existing, starting new pilot programs, and I'm hopefully National Farm to School Network will be releasing sort of a mid-year what's going on in 2025 in the next few weeks, just to celebrate the way that states are stepping up and acting accordingly to a lot of what's happening at the federal level. I hope that answers your question, Kate, but feel free to speak up if it doesn't.
All right.
Well, we'll stay on if anyone wants to hang back and ask us questions. But if not, yes, we're still seeing increases. Thanks, Kate. If not, thank you all again for being here. Thank you for supporting Farm to School, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.